Hello, today is Friday, January 31st. Welcome to episode 408 of Fault Lines, the National Security Institute's podcast that gets you quickly up to speed 3 times a week on the national security and foreign policy debates shaking up America. I am NSI Deputy Director Martha Miller, and I'm joined today by NSI CTC Senior Fellow Matt Hayden, NSI Senior Fellow Bishop Garrison, and NSI Senior Fellow Andrew Boreen. As the third anniversary of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine approaches, the conflict is at a critical juncture. Recent Ukrainian strikes on Russian oil refineries have significantly disrupted Russia's economy, cutting into one of its most critical revenue streams for sustaining the war. The impact of these strikes has been compounded by fresh U.S. sanctions targeting Russian oil exports, while questions remain about whether President Trump will continue or alter this pressure campaign. Meanwhile, a growing divide within the European Union has emerged over the idea of resuming Russian gas imports. While some nations, including Hungary and Germany, advocate for reestablishing energy flows to lower costs, or at least some political factions within these countries do, Poland has strongly opposed such a move, calling for the complete dismantling of the Nord Stream pipeline infrastructure to prevent future dependency on Russian energy. Trump's recent comments on the war, ranging from threats of new sanctions on Russia to suggesting quick peace negotiations, have added to the uncertainty. His administration's stance could determine whether Ukraine continues to receive strong Western support or faces pressure to accept a negotiated settlement on unfavorable terms. Matt, let's go to you. There have been recent developments in Kursk, and I'm just curious to get your take on what this means in the big picture, and also, just from a military strategy standpoint and tactical standpoint, what your evaluation is.
Well, the first thing we're seeing is, number one, the Ukrainians are leveraging drones in ways that are making waves. The traditional videos we got used to seeing over the last few years of taking on tank operators and kind of seeing like the things you would find off the shelf have drastically shifted into very serious munitions that are taking out oil refineries in the vein of almost a cruise missile. And so we're seeing capability that's being born and not being handed. That's pretty impressive, candidly. They're doing work with what they're being provided. At the same time, it's being effective in disrupting some of the flows that Russia counts on. And then when we start talking about Russian oil, there was a time when saying don't buy Russian oil was controversial. And now we almost have that flipped. And so we're seeing that there are countries that are saying, no way should this be an open spigot into Europe, and that it should be held harmless to provide resources into this conflict. So it's actually an impressive turn to see sort of the shift there. So I think that's where my focus has been, is seeing how sort of the art of war in a modern world is going on, and what these two players are leveraging is both the economic aspect and the military tools aspect.
Bishop, there have been some internal fractures and within the Kremlin, and certainly some interesting developments in Russia. Can you speak to that, and what are your thoughts? Like, is this sustainable for Russia?
Yeah. At the same time, you're talking about what Matt hit on in terms of the economic pieces of this, the sanctions. You also have a highly unpopular conscription policy that was put into play. You have somewhere in the neighborhood of 430,000 soldiers' lives lost. You have the continued pressure on a campaign that's been able to achieve less than 1% of the total land control within the country itself. Like Putin is dealing with now domestically a lot of unhappy people. And when you look at the totality of this, when he said this was going to be a 3-day strategic military event, basically, it's turned into what is about to enter its 4th year of a hot war. And you're seeing a lot of Russians very unhappy about this. And you add to the point that at the end of the day, a lot of Putin's power comes from his ability to project power internationally. And that helps to stabilize and control his image domestically. So now that we've seen the curtain pulled back on this a bit and revealing that he is not as powerful and doesn't have as much as a strategic vision as many have long believed or believe that he's had the ability to maintain, is beginning and has for some time now been eroding his power at home. And you have more people that are willing to step out and say, we are against this. And I think it's just only going to continue until he finds a way to come to the table and make some tough decisions about what he sees as victory and what he's willing to give up and compromise on in order to stop this war.
Andrew, I know you were recently in Ukraine, and you follow developments in Europe pretty closely. Tell me, what is at stake with this war? What are the implications for Western Europe? And do you think that the EU appreciates the threat?
So, well, first off, my belief on EU is it's not really an organization that we need to worry about. We talk about military affairs or national security because they have no national security powers. People get confused. They think the EU is going to replace European defense and NATO. There's a reason the Europeans are relying on NATO, and it's because the EU is an economic and commercial and civil rights organization in many ways. NATO is an alliance that provides defense, and then most Americans don't understand that. For instance, the only state entities are members of the EU alone. So Germany has its own intelligence service, its own military. France has its own intelligence, its own military. They do not have a common European military platform other than NATO. So I want to highlight that because I think there's a lot of confusion when people in America think about Europe, and I think another thing we're going to see when we talk about Bishop's point about the expansion of hot war, I think the hot war is already far beyond the borders of Ukraine. I've also been in Bulgaria and talked to Todor Tagarev, their Minister of Defense, and others. There are documented, and anyone can see this in the news, that of GRU operatives, Russian military intelligence operatives, supporting fires on factory floors. Bulgaria committed to manufacture a lot of artillery rounds to deploy into Ukraine. Those factories have seen deaths. There's harassment. There's social media harassment through proxies. Increasingly, we're seeing that type of activity, even so deep into Europe that you're looking at Germany. The Rheinmetall CEO had an assassination contract taken out on him. Why Germany? Well, because Germany has not yet decided to allow Taurus missiles into the Ukraine conflict. And that's not an EU question. That's a Germany question. And so, like all things, when Europeans look at America, they don't really understand our politics. And when Americans look at Europe, we don't really understand European politics. So I think, I guess overall, what I would say is a couple of things about the inbound Trump administration and strategically what that means. I saw a recent post from the president about directed at the Russian people, saying, hey, love the Russian people. Your government's making some mistakes in Ukraine. The killing must end. And you can do this the easy way or the hard way. And what I take that is Trump wants to move into a negotiation position, believes that maybe both sides of the belligerents, the Ukrainian side and those others, and the Russian Federation, Belarus types on the other, might be getting tired enough. The losses might be heavy enough. I believe at this point, Russia has lost more tanks than they have remaining. They're closing in on a very dangerous mark of 1 million casualties on the Russian side of this conflict. And they're adding in North Korean bodies into what really looks like World War I trench warfare with poorly trained infantry formations running into machine guns. So this is a really interesting conflict. There's a lot going on, but I think I'm actually quite optimistic when I see that type of commentary from President Trump, and you can observe how heavy the losses are becoming in Russia. And in all of my conversations with senior leadership in Ukraine, not the president, I don't meet with Zelensky, but I meet with some people around him when I'm there. Offline, what they will say is they're ready to negotiate, but Putin has not become tired enough to negotiate. And I think I think we're crossing some conversion points where the Russian Federation becomes tired enough.
And to your point, I mean, the EU is an economic body. Do you think, though, that the views among Europeans on the dependency on Russian energy, do you think, where do you see that going? And do you think they've learned their lesson, with this conflict?
So I think the answer is it depends, right? Like there is no collective European opinion
Right.
on this any more than if you asked Americans, what's your opinion on a hot button issue that has
Mhm.
divided us across left and right?
Right.
So that said, I think Nord Stream, that question mark, well, okay, then you have to replace it with something. The alliance needs to replace it with something.
Mhm.
And so, interestingly, a lot of this push from the incoming administration to increase drilling, increase American leadership in energy production. We've heard talks of increasing grid connectivity for super regional grid connectivity and energy movement. So I think that's the kind of thing where it's an economic thing. So economically, there has to be an alternative to that.
Mhm.
And it doesn't have to be the same price. Like it could be a little more expensive than Russian gas because it doesn't come with that secondary rider problem of all of the risk of being dependent on Russia and allowing Russian influence on Europe. So short answer is I think that's also moving in a direction where we may not see the Nord Stream reopening if the allies can kind of get their act together and provide energy themselves.
Great. Well, I think that's a wrap, guys. I think we've reached our time limit. And so, yeah, let's call it there. Thank you so much to Kelly Crowley, Claude Jennings, and the NSI staff for their help producing today's episode. And join us Monday, February 3rd for another episode of Fault Lines. Find us on YouTube because we actually are on video on YouTube as well.
Oh,
Or, find us on Spotify or your favorite podcasting app. Have a great weekend. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody.